Hey everyone, welcome to the third day of Airbyte launch week. We've had some really awesome presentations over the last few days, and we have two more for you all, one now and one tomorrow. Just as a quick recap of what we've done and what we've gone over, on the first day, we announced our maintainer program. The community can contribute and earn bounties by working on Airbyte connectors and improving connector quality in many ways. Additionally, we announced our first ever conference, Move Data. You can start submitting talks for that, regardless of your speaker experience. We'd love to hear what you have to say about orchestration, data quality, data integration, and general data engineering practices. The CFP is open, so you can check that out on our website. Additionally, yesterday we had Natalie, Andy, and Michelle go over some of the behind-the-scenes ideas behind our Airbyte cloud launch, talking about connector quality and kind of giving a little bit of teasers for today, where we're going to dive into that much deeper. So today we're going to have our head of engineering, Charles, and our head of connectors, Sharif, go into some of these ideas. And to kick us off, we're going to have Charles here talk to us about the engineering roadmap. So I will now hand it over to him. Thank you, Charles. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Abhi. As it's been said, my name's Charles. I head up engineering at Airbyte, and I'm going to briefly share how we're evolving, specifically the platform during Q2 and beyond. After that, Sharif will follow up with discussing the roadmap for our connector strategy. As always, transparency is core to everything we do at Airbyte. So you'll be able to see everything that we talk about today in our public directional roadmap, so that you can see how our investments evolve over time. In Q2, the next step for the platform is to release evolution and column selection to empower users to interact with their data. Users will be able to understand how their data will be surfaced in their warehouses and how it will evolve over time as the source schema changes. We'll also be focusing heavily on improving the self-serve experience at Airbyte. Some top things on that list are making the onboarding experience easier to follow, adding notifications so that you can set and forget your configuration, and then improving feedback to users so that when something unexpected does happen, the user is able to easily understand it and remediate it. To take an example there, you can imagine if you rotate the password for your Postgres database or something like that, but you forget to update it in Airbyte. Airbyte should be able to tell you that there's a problem, that your password has expired, so that you don't have to remember and go in and do that yourself. Looking beyond Q2, we'll pursue features that'll allow larger and more advanced organizations to succeed with Airbyte. Some key features there include SSO, cloud API access, and additional security compliances beyond SOC 2. In addition, we'll be expanding capabilities around where data transits. For cost, latency, and compliance reasons, it's important for data to always move through servers that are as close to where the data is going as possible. Thus, we'll be rolling out our cloud product across all major cloud providers and geographic regions. In cases where data already exists in a company's secure network, we'll also provide the ability to install parts of Airbyte in your cloud so that you can get the best of both worlds, a managed solution that allows your data to stay within your network. Finally, we will begin building on top of the data mesh that we've already started to allow for more advanced use cases, like reverse ETL. We have a busy quarter ahead and a busy year as well. And so we look forward to evolving the platform and building in public with all of you. So thank you for the time, and see you out there.
Thank you, Charles. We really look forward to a lot of these things. Really excited about reverse ETL in particular. Really excited about SOC 2. I guess it's not really the biggest thing to get excited about, but I guess that's me. We will now hand it over to our head of connectors, Sharif. Thank you so much for being here. Glad to have you on the show. Is there anything you'd like to say before getting started?
No, just glad to be here and chat roadmap with y'all.
Awesome. Let's get it.
Well, thanks, Abhi, for the warm introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Sharif. I'm an engineering manager on the connectors team. I'm here to tell you about what we'll be working on in Q2 and beyond. So first up, let's talk about connector quality. As a data infrastructure product, Airbyte connectors are expected to be as close to infallible as possible across many areas: reliability, fault tolerability, usability, docs, feature set, speed, you name it. On the other hand, integrating with external APIs, databases, systems, etc., is an inherently volatile endeavor. Certain edge cases, performance issues, or optimizations are only knowable once users begin testing the product. So to balance these two realities, we've just rolled out a comprehensive framework that categorizes our connectors into 3 different stages that help our users know what to expect from any given connector. The 3 stages are alpha, beta, and generally available connectors. And so at a high level, an alpha connector represents a newly implemented connector, whereas a beta connector is something with more adoption, reliability that we're actively improving to make generally available. And generally available connectors are generally very high quality, reliable connectors with a robust feature set that have been tested with a large segment of users. And at each stage, each connector will be treated like an individual product, and it will be evaluated on the following criteria, among others: adoption, reliability, user experience, documentation, and feature set. So let's start talking about adoption. We look at this number because usage of connectors not only helps us determine if it makes sense to invest more in that connector, but it also helps us stress test its robustness under load and start getting feedback from users to understand the features and functionalities that are most important to them. This leads us into a connector's reliability. As part of certifying connectors, we evaluate open bugs, test coverage, and the connector's overall performance in production to make sure that a connector is delivering data in a complete, accurate, and successful way. Another thing we look at is we need to ensure that each connector is very easy to use. Our North Star here is for users to get set up and syncing data with connectors in the most seamless and intuitive way possible, ideally without relying on documentation. We really want to minimize the time to value that customers are getting from using our product. On top of that, of course, documentation will be needed. So we want to make sure that it's reliable, comprehensive, and readable. And then finally, getting into the feature set. At the alpha stage of a connector, we're building what we're calling the minimum lovable feature set. So we start with at least one core use case before implementing more features over time. So for example, if we were to implement, let's say, the Stripe connector, we might start off with only supporting exports of transaction data before we expand to other streams like invoices, refunds, dispute, and so on. So we're hoping that this program provides a level of transparency that can help instill a lot of confidence in each and every one of the connectors that you're using. In its early stages, we've seen it deliver a great experience for customers, and we're hoping that it continues to do that. So with the certification system outlined, our goals for Q2 include things. First of all, we're coming out with 2 new highly requested connectors: Google Sheets as a destination and the SFTP source. In addition, we're targeting getting about 20 connectors to GA this quarter, at least. Category topping APIs like Google Ads, Shopify, Zendesk support are a big focus. We're also working on our blob storage support on the source side. So for S3, we're targeting getting that into general availability. We are also going to be spending a lot of time this quarter focusing on databases. We've seen from the feedback from users and usage data that databases are incredibly popular. And so we'll be working on getting the Postgres source connector into general availability with CDC support and with Schema Evolution, like what Charles mentioned. And finally, we're certifying 4 connectors as beta, and we'll look to them into GA by next quarter. On this quarter, Q2, our goal is to reach more than 100 generally available connectors by the end of the year, at least. So stay tuned on those updates. The second big piece we're going to be focusing on, apart from developing connectors directly, is actually the connector developer experience. So at Airbyte, our goal is to solve the issue of integrating reliably, not just with any connectors, but with especially the long tail of connectors. And so, like others, for example, Michelle have said during this launch week, The most important way of doing that is to reduce the amount of code and work that a developer needs to do to maintain a reliable connector. One approach we're taking this quarter is something we're particularly excited about. It's a project we're calling Connectors as Configuration. This project's main insight is that when you're pulling data from a REST API, if you zoom all the way out, it's really just the process of answering a few questions, each of which has a finite number of answers, right? So how do you authenticate to the API? How do you paginate? What headers you're using? What's the API URL, output schema, etc. And each of these questions has a finite number of answers, right? So for authentication, most APIs are going to use OAuth or API keys. For pagination, most APIs are going to use header links, page numbers, limits and offsets, and whatnot. And so on and so forth. When you're going into each of these pieces of what does it take to support an API connector, there's really a finite number of answers you could end up with. So in theory, it should be possible to make the process of building a connector not that much harder than filling out a form. Now, I recognize this is probably a huge simplification, but fundamentally, we think there is enough of an insight here that we're going to spend a lot of time this quarter making it happen and seeing how close we can get to that. Another item we're focusing on this quarter is connector acceptance tests. So these are the black box test suites, which give us a lot of assurance that our connectors are behaving correctly and maximize our leverage. There's actually a blog post coming out about this on Monday, so stay tuned for that. But we've gotten a lot of great feedback that while they're very useful and help developers raise the bar of their output, they could be faster and a bit more ergonomic. So we're spending time focusing on speeding up local iteration time significantly by allowing caching of API responses natively inside acceptance tests and making them easier to interact with, whether it's through the output test reports, the ability to selectively run specific tests, or do pre and post hooks for working on acceptance tests. Another big point of friction for developers is having to specify output schemas. While it's super important to do correctly, today it's often a very manual process and it takes a lot of time and can be very error prone. So we're coming up with some tooling to make this process a lot more seamless by automatically inferring schemas from API return values, open API specs, or other directions, and making that very easy for use. Another thing we noticed that is a low-hanging fruit for significantly improving throughput is by using multithreading to get as close as possible to API quotas without actually exceeding them. And you can do this on a large number of APIs. So that's another thing we're going to be looking into enabling by default CDK. And finally, in terms of remission and increasing the overall pleasantness of developing connectors for Airbyte, we'll be working on making M1 chips work out of the box for connectors, as well as supporting connector configuration migrations so that developers can continuously adapt the input formats of their connectors to the best possible experience without having to make sacrifices due to practical reasons. And so, as you can probably see, we have a ton of really exciting stuff to deliver to you in the second quarter and beyond. And we're really excited to share the results as soon as we can. So that's all I have on connector roadmap.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sharif. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to a quick Q&A session. So we're going to bring our head of engineering back, Charles, and we're going to have Sharif here, and we're going to have both of them answer questions about both the engineering roadmap and a lot about what Sharif just talked about in terms of connector certification and improvements that are going to happen to the CDK and the connector ecosystem. So I guess I'm going to start off with some of my basic questions that I'm kind of interested in. What is the timeline for some of the features for maybe larger organizations like SSO? When are we going to see that? What are maybe some of the challenges holding that back, and what have you seen, I guess, behind the scenes?
Yeah, for sure. I don't foresee major challenges there beyond sort of normal work implementation. For us, getting Schema Evolution, some of the other features I mentioned, are just higher priority because they affect all of our users. So our focus is to nail those first, and then I think looking at some of those larger features for larger organizations probably comes closer towards the end of the year is when we'll start biting that off.
Awesome. Cool. Let's go on to our next question. So when can we expect to see connector parity with open source? Right now, this is, I think, what a lot of people who I guess are starting to try out and use Airbyte Cloud. A lot of them are, I think, interested in not only, I think, connector parity with open source, but also probably like custom connectors as well. Because I think that's especially something that I hear in a lot of calls with users. So if you could speak to that, Sharif, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so I can probably speak to the parity piece. Let Charles take the custom connectors question. But in terms of parity, that's a great question. We're always working on getting that parity out there. Open source by nature is always like the frontier, so to speak, where people are building new connectors, testing them out. And the persona is generally a lot more, the persona of users using it are a lot more, willing to try new things out. And so to some extent, I think it's normal that cloud is like a little bit lagging behind open source. This being said, we are actively working to get parity between open source and cloud on the current set of connectors, so that we can, from there, start to get more into this mode of, okay, connectors that are introduced in open source will be a little bit lagging, but it shouldn't be too much of a lag time after that. So I guess in short, we're working on it. We hear the feedback and expect to see some of your favorite connectors in cloud very soon.
Yeah, and so I can speak to the custom connectors piece a little bit. For those of you who use the open source product, I think there's like some ways that it's sort of like non-obvious why it's quite a bit more difficult in the cloud environment in order to make custom connectors really work as expected. Essentially because it's not as easy to sort of jump into the like actual running of Airbyte if you're a user of cloud. It's essentially we need to build an experience to make it easy for you to build a connect and then be able to see that it's working well. So that's something that we're going to probably start looking into in Q3, and probably think about doing it sort of like with an incremental approach of rolling out a beta of that and really workshopping it with some folks to make sure that when we present more widely, that we're providing an experience that's really usable.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much for talking about that. I guess something else that I hear from users along with custom connectors, and I guess one of the biggest ones, considering like our users are pretty much all over the globe. When is Airbyte Cloud going to be released in like other regions, and like when are we going to be able to? Additionally, like when are you going to be able to like host a data center in like APAC or like Canada?
Yeah, that's something we're starting work on in Q2, but I don't think we'll have a deliverable into sometime in Q3 is where we're shooting for there. Essentially, we're looking at multi-cloud and multi-region, and from an architectural point of view, it's all sort of the same problem, and so it unlocks a lot for a lot of users. So that's definitely going to be top of the list in Q3.
Awesome. Yeah, so we have Farhan from the chat who asks, connectors in alpha and beta certification phase will still be available for every user, right?
Yeah, so connectors are available no matter what stage they're in. The important part is that we are giving users kind of the right expectations about what a connector in alpha, beta, or GA actually entails for their workload. But they will be all available, correct?
Awesome. Yeah. Additionally, they ask, when will we be seeing multi-threading?
I assume this is multi-threading at the connector level, because that's what we were talking about just here for the, yeah. So if that's what you're referring to, Farhan, that's something that we'll be looking into very soon. So, there's a lot of use cases for this. One is just the general throughput, but two is also especially on initial syncs of connectors. If you have let's say a very large Salesforce or HubSpot account that you're moving data out of, multi-threading is really, really important to minimize the time to value that you're getting. And so that's something that we're actively investigating. It's easier to do on a single connector level in some sense, but we're also looking for ways to roll that out across a bunch of connectors via introducing it in the CDK natively. So hopefully we'll have something to update you on this in the next few weeks or a couple months.
I guess I have a very personal question well, not a really personal question, but like I'm I'm personally very interested in, I think I guess maybe the new CDKs that are coming out that might be able to natively support multi-threading. So if we think about one of the new CDKs created by one of our users, which is a Go CDK, which like it supports like, which I mean, Go obviously has like the primitive with Go routines. So maybe like multi-threading would be like more easier to bake into that. Like, so what are you thinking about in terms of like supporting all of these different CDKs or supporting different like connector building experiences? And is maybe there a thought of like maybe moving away from Python or maybe directly integrating some of these CDKs into the ecosystem? You could just speak to some or all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot to say there. So first of all, I think our community has done an amazing job creating some of these CDKs. The Go CDK, for example, which was featured on one of our community calls a few weeks ago, it was just super powerful. And as somebody watching that talk, I was just really impressed with what the community was able to do. So if you're working with, if Go is your preferred language, by all means, I highly recommend taking a look at Bitstrapped, their CDK that they create. So having said this, I think we're still seeing a lot of popularity around Python as the language for building API connectors specifically. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one is from a data science point of view, data analysis point of view, popular. It has great, package like pandas and others that are used in that domain. Number two is Python. Even if you're not particularly good at it, it's very easy to produce kind of like an MVP of something very quickly. And so I think for those reasons, we're still seeing a ton of interest in working with the Python CDK. And so that'll be probably our main supported CDK for the time being. As soon as we have more concrete plans to like offer support for different languages and kind of have those be handled by Airbyte, we're more than happy to do that. This being said, the Airbyte protocol itself doesn't care, it doesn't care about what language is used to implement a connector. That's one of the really empowering things about working with the Airbyte specification is that there's a lot of room for people in the community like Bitstrapped and others and Pharos who have created the TypeScript CDK to go and create these tools and kind of work from their area of comfort. And so we'll be focusing on the Python and Java code bases for now. The community's doing a bang up job of the rest of the languages. We'll be sure to kind of say more if we have updates on that.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for speaking to that. So we have another question from Madara who asks, are there any plans to introduce REST API as a connector, e.g. a custom API point that exposes a custom set of data written by the user to be used as a source?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually had some expeditions into this earlier on in the product, and we ended up deprecating that particular connector just because we didn't think it was at a level that facilitated a great customer experience or user experience. It is something that we are very much planning to revisit. So I talked a little bit about the connectors as configuration project. That's very much in the alley of this, which is we want you to be able to describe how an API works as a configuration and then use that to create an API connector. And so REST API as a connector is very much in that category, and hopefully we can have some good updates on that. Madara, I also recommend if you're interested in this, I would love to get kind of more details from you if you want to open a GitHub issue or send us a message on Slack or something. I'd love to understand more about what that means to you.
Awesome. So I have another question that I've personally been thinking about is like what went into Schema Evolution? Because I know this has been kind of in process for a while. There's a lot of like design considerations. There's a lot of like obviously a lot of backend work to be done. How was the development of this, and how do you feel about it right now?
Yeah, I think this is one of those features that if you ask, 6 different users, like how should it look, you'll get 6 different answers. But it's also like every user will tell you with very high confidence that their answer is the right one.
Also, yeah, can you, like, for maybe people that don't have full context, can you
Sure.
explain schema evolution, why it's important, and what's and
Yeah, for
where
sure.
it is?
Yeah, and so yeah, to tug on that thread a little bit, like essentially when we say schema evolution, the schema of data changes over time. This is most common in say like your database, right? You add a new table, you add a column, et cetera, et cetera. And so yeah, to pull on the thread that like everybody has their like own way they think about it. It's, there are folks who are like, what I want to see is you just detect new tables coming in and you're just like always grabbing data, versus folks who are like, no, I only want to see the evolution of tables I've already selected, right? And if new stuff is coming in, that may be a liability because maybe there's some sort of like PII in it or something like that, right? And you like, the more you dig in, the more they're just like a lot of sort of like optionality around that sort of thing. And so essentially what we're trying to do is pick off, like understand the categories of what folks expect from schema evolution and make sure that we provide a reasonable amount of configuration around that. Because it's always easy to like add tons and tons of knobs, but that doesn't lead to a good user experience, obviously. And so the focus is trying to figure out, like the 2 or 3 knobs that are going to really make most of our users successful.
Yeah, awesome. That makes a ton of sense. So I think that is pretty much going to wrap up our presentation for today. I don't have any more questions for you. Would either of you like to say some words before we sign off?
I want to plug our public roadmap. It's been put, I think, in all of the chats. So we're using a tool called Harvester. Check it out. I think it's like a really cool representation of the roadmap. And as I mentioned at the top, we're always really excited to build publicly and transparently. So this should be your insight into how our roadmap is evolving over time.
Awesome. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much, Sharif and Charles, for joining me on today's broadcast. As a quick reminder, we do have one last presentation for us tomorrow. Our user success engineer, Augustin, is going to be demoing our new CLI. So definitely tune in for that. Also, there's going to be one more surprise that we have not revealed yet. So if you want to hear about that for the first time and be there when we announce it, you should join in tomorrow. And we would love to see you there. Additionally, we have some of our content from the previous days on our YouTube channel. So make sure to check out the past broadcasts there. If you don't check them out now, we'll be polishing them up and putting them on our YouTube and putting them on our YouTube channel as official videos later next week. So you definitely have time to just hang in there. So thank you so much for everyone who tuned in today. And I really appreciate the questions from the chat. And please definitely check out some of the work that we're doing. Check out the roadmap. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you.